Writer Ami McKay was born in the Indiana Corn Belt. A love interest drew her to rural Nova Scotia, where she says she wants to stay for the rest of her days. Scots Bay is obviously conducive to love and writing great prose. It is my pleasure to welcome Ami McKay to Studio 4 to tell us more.
Thank you.
Still want to spend the rest of your days in Nova Scotia, or have you had other thoughts?
No, I love it there. Not leaving.
And still have the love interest?
Yes, my dear husband, absolutely, yeah.
When you were a little girl in rural Indiana, romping through the cornfields and the interstates.
Yeah, hopefully not too much on the interstate.
Not too much on the interstate. Did you think about being a writer, becoming a writer?
Well, I love to read, and I think that's where all writers start, right?
Sure,
and,
bookworms.
Yeah, and I can remember the first backpack that I wanted. It wasn't for school, it was so I could climb a tree and sit and read. And so it started with that, and then, yeah, probably small books of poetry that I would, you know, sort of pen, and essays and short stories. And
who did you read? Who did you love to read?
Wow, I loved reading Charles Dickens. And from a very, like even from 10 and 11 years old, I just would fall into that world of Dickens' London and adored it. And
he set the scene so well.
He did.
He really knew how to take you there, as did Jane Austen and others. When you wrote The Birth House,
yes,
it had a lot of acclaim.
It got some attention, yes.
Did it surprise you in any way?
Absolutely.
All of a sudden they say, Ami McKay, like the face of fiction, the new face of fiction.
It was surprising, absolutely. In fact, I think a lot of authors, myself included, when you're working on a first novel, you don't know if anyone's going to be interested in it or if it's going to be published.
And the essence of The Birth House was?
It was, the roots of it actually had to do with the house that we bought in Nova Scotia. It was this old farmhouse. We didn't know it at the time when we moved in, but it had been a birthing house for the community, and the midwife who had lived there had, you know, worked with the women in the community for many years, and the women there would come to her house to have the babies. And I found this out actually after living there a short time. I got pregnant with my second child, and when the word kind of got around the community that I was expecting, the stories of the house began to surface. And it led me on this amazing journey then to write the novel.
So the history of the house inspired you. The Virgin Cure. First of all, what is the Virgin Cure for anybody who doesn't know?
Well, it's actually, it's quite a tragic thing.
What was the Virgin Cure?
Well,
let's hope.
Actually, what is? I knew about it in the present before I knew about it in the past. It's
really?
This belief that a man could be cured of a disease by having relations with a virgin. And it exists in sub-Saharan Africa today, in Cambodia, in Thailand, around the disease of AIDS. And so I knew about it actually in the present, and then when I was doing research for this novel, I found out that it existed in the 19th century in New York, London, Paris.
Yes, a man who had syphilis.
Yes.
A wealthy man who had syphilis, most likely, thought if he had sex with a virgin, the syphilis would go away. Forget about the virgin.
That's right. They were a commodity. These girls were bought and sold just as easily as any material goods.
It was astounding to me to read. I know it's fiction, but I know that so much of your fiction is based in history. To read about the life of a young woman in that time, a poor young woman.
Right, yeah. The main character in this novel, her name is Moth, and she's 12 years old, so she's really still a child. And she ends up on the streets of New York, as many children did. There were 30,000 children under the age of 15 on the streets of New York in 1870.
Yeah.
So her plight was one of many, but I wanted to tell her specific story. And so it's her journey in trying to just survive.
Mother a fortune teller, father gone.
Right.
She on the streets. What a lovely name, Moth.
Thank you.
That wasn't her real name.
No, I actually stole it from Shakespeare.
Okay, real name was Ada, wasn't it? She was named Ada. But what was her life like at 12, Moth's life?
It was very precarious. I mean, you know, she had left her mother's house. Actually, she had been sold by her mother to a wealthy woman to be a servant in this woman's home, which was very common at the time for these, especially immigrant families who were settling in the Lower East Side of Manhattan, living in the tenements. Life was not turning out to be the American dream that they thought it would be. And so when their child got to be 10, 11, 12 years old, they really felt like perhaps it would be a better life choice for them to sell them into servitude in a wealthy person's home. So that was the first part.
A better life for my daughter, perhaps the goal, or some money so that I can eat, but not really doing the math sometimes about what the child's life would be like in the home of an evil, wealthy woman.
That's right, yeah. You know, you just don't, I think her mother maybe didn't, like you said, she didn't do the math, she didn't have those expectations of knowing what would come next, and neither did Moth.
Who helped these girls, state-wise, government-wise, a social network? Were there saints among the sinners?
Yeah.
Is the question.
Yes, there were. And actually, that's where the roots of this story began for me. It was in researching the life of my great-great-grandmother. She was one of the first female physicians in New York at a time when it was not proper or right to be a lady physician.
I guess not.
So she was a real rebel, and her work was among these kids, these homeless children on the Lower East Side of New York, and specifically with girls who had gone into lives of prostitution or were about to enter into that.
And what did these girls feel about a life of prostitution? I know you weren't there, but you've done so much research. It was honorable. It was a way to make a decent living. It was a way out of the Bowery.
I think it absolutely was a way out for them in a lot of cases, or so they thought. And sometimes it worked out well. There is a character in the book who becomes more a courtesan than anything else. Her name is Rose. And, but so many of these girls, it ended up being just this downward spiral, you know, once they were sold for their virginity and then continuing in this life of prostitution.
Yes.
It was never a step up.
Hard to break out, and as every young girl probably dreams, maybe one of these men will marry me.
Right, fall in love with me,
the Cinderella story, or
yeah, because they are
something
really
like
girls.
that.
Yeah, they're just girls.